Okay, hi everyone. Officially welcome to day one, part one of Activate Your Archetype. This is a masterclass to kind of hopefully better explain what the archetypes are and how it benefits us to um, interact with them on a conscious level, and furthermore, how doing so like enhances our effectiveness on earth, our potency in our soul mission. um, Kind of takes us out of the realm of just floundering around and doing a bunch of nothing and being here more on purpose. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here live. You know, I love having people to talk to when I come on live, but also thank you for watching the replay. I appreciate you and I feel your energy. And I know a lot of people signed up for this one. So thanks for giving me your time. Okay. So the obvious first question for this masterclass is like, what even is an archetype? If you were in my course, Who the Fuck Am I? You'll know that I did a module about it, which was the first time I actually tried to talk about the archetypes from like a dimensional and identity level. And I feel like it was the one that I did the worst on because man, it really highlighted to me that I understand what archetypes are, but they are very complicated to talk about, very, very complicated to summarize because it's an abstract concept. I'm sure we've all heard the word 1,000 times, and we, if not more, and we have a general idea of what an archetype means, but it's kind of associated with like, Jungian psychology, and dreams, and it's hard to pinpoint. Furthermore, I've noticed in the last couple years that people often have some misunderstandings around archetypes, as though there's, like as though we each carry a principal archetype, and people want to know what their archetype is, which is only natural because of course we want to know about ourselves. But my perception of an archetype, and I've thought about this a lot, and I actually made notes in hopes of articulating it clearly, is that an archetype is a universal character lens through which we express certain energetic themes and roles. So archetypes can show up. So when I say universal, I mean that it's like it applies across cultures. Different cultures will have different names for these character lenses, or roles, but it is a universal energy that everybody can kind of recognize and identify, even if they don't identify with it per se. So an example would be, I'm going to go into a lot of examples, but I'm going to use the example of the warrior as an archetype. It's not one that I identify with. I don't really feel like I have any warrior energy in me in this lifetime at all. But I can identify the warrior archetype, and it doesn't matter what it's called by in a different culture, or if they have a character that represents that has a name or whatever. It doesn't matter. I can still identify with it. I can sort of like understand it and relate to it, even if I don't carry that particular archetype myself. In this realm, we are subject to narratives, meaning that this is how we understand and interpret and navigate life, is through narrative. So archetypes are like templates or molds that we pour our consciousness and life force energy into to organize and direct the flow of our consciousness and life force energy. So I remember the first time I really understood archetypes. Like I had been playing with it for a long time, because they kind of always made sense to me. But when I really, really understood them, I heard someone describe them as like, and this is totally abstract. If it doesn't register with you, don't worry about it. But they kind of described it as like a band of consciousness. And when consciousness comes through a certain archetype, it like pours through that mold like a cookie cutter. So it takes on that shape, so to speak. It takes on those characteristics, but it's all the same higher level of consciousness. I believe that the higher archetypes are sort of seventh and eighth dimensional expressions of consciousness. So to me, in my understanding, in the download I received about how consciousness expresses itself through different dimensions, is that the eighth dimension is the oversoul dreaming mind. So each of us belongs to this like bigger oversoul, this human collective consciousness oversoul. And before it expresses itself as each of us individually, it kind of like expresses through the archetypal realm. So that's what I mean. Like there are these like cookie cutters, or do you remember those Play-Doh fun sets where, like, I remember having a McDonald's Play-Doh fun set, and it had this little extruder piece. It was this plastic piece that you fit into a little rack, and then you would put your Play-Doh in and you would crank the lever and it would push the Play-Doh through and it would come out like spaghetti or like French fries or whatever. That's what I see the archetypes as. They're sort of these molds that can carry a particular frequency of consciousness that kind of resonates as a character, a greater character, but it's all the same oversoul, right? So they're not separate characters from us. They're more like themes. And in a sense, it's impossible for us to move through life without embodying an archetype, because we navigate life through the story or the narrative. And what I mean by story, like, navigating life through story, like what I specifically mean by that is that we make things mean things. We experience life and we create a story. It's a very, very unique aspect, a unique feature of this realm and our level of consciousness that we have here, where, we hear people say sometimes that nothing has its like any inherent meaning. We are the ones that give it meaning. And I do believe that to an extent. I'm not saying like, I kind of want to shy away from absolutes, speaking in absolutes as if anything is 100% true 100% of the time. But I do believe that that's true, because two different people can have, seemingly the same experience, and based on the differences in their consciousness and their circumstances, they will make it mean something different. And from the point where we start to become self-aware, we start to create a story about ourselves based on, our interactions with our caregivers and our siblings or whoever else is in our environment. And then as we navigate the rest of life, we tend to fit the things that we experience in our lives into that story somehow. And recognizing and honoring the story, not villainizing it, but becoming conscious of it and consciously writing our story, is one of the sort of key upgrades that we are experiencing right now as our collective consciousness ascends and our individual consciousness ascends. It's realizing that we're in the driver's seat of the story that we create. But I don't want to speak in absolutes, but I personally can't see how it's possible to exist as a human outside of a narrative. Even when I think about like Eckhart Tolle, like he's an example because he, whatever, in his book, The Power of Now, went through his like horrible dark night of the soul, existential dread, and then reached the rock bottom and realized that nothing matters, everything is meaningless, that he's not even real and none of this is real. And then he just sat on park benches and did nothing, in a state of bliss for however long he did. But I'm sure that even though he had really, really been able to see outside of the narrative matrix that kind of usually holds us locked in place, I'm sure he still had a perception of self in relationship to everything else, and it was creating a story. It was just more of a neutral story for him. But so I don't really see how it would be possible for at least the vast majority, like 99.99999999999% of humans to exist outside of a narrative. So because we exist within a self-created narrative, that means that we are embodying archetypes, whether we're conscious of it or not. And like I said, archetypes are like those templates or molds that we pour our consciousness into, and we pour our creative life force energy into, and it sort of creates like a direction and an organization for that consciousness and life force energy. It advances our perception of self. Let me see here. Maybe I'll go into some examples of archetypes to help illustrate all of this. So there are, first of all, I want to say there are infinitely many archetypes. It would be impossible, even if I sat here for 2 hours and named every archetype that comes to mind, it would be impossible that I could ever name all the archetypes. There are so many. But examples of archetypes would be the zodiac signs. And even when you look at the zodiac signs, each one is full of sub-archetypes. Like, for example, we're in the sign of Leo right now. So one of the, so Leo on its own is an archetypal energy. If you're a Leo, you understand what I mean, that you have these like qualities, and it sort of animates you, and it connects you to a higher energy than just your human ego expression. It's almost like, we belong, if you're a Leo, you belong to the Leo sun sign collective, and you're tapping into a consciousness field, an energy field of that Leo sun sign collective. But within Leo, there are sub archetypes. There's like, the archetype of the lion, who is kind of king shit. Like, it's really funny that they call the lion king of the jungle, because lions don't live in jungles, but whatever. It's like, the king of the Serengeti, or the queen of the Serengeti. So it's this very like feline, basking, like confident walking, sort of like I'm okay with just lazing in the sun for hours and hours and hours, because I am royalty. There's that sub archetype. There's the sub archetype of the performer, the person that loves to be on stage and highly visible, and to channel like powerful emotions and connect with the crowd. There's the archetype of the entertainer, like the host, who just loves having parties and hosting parties and being the life of the party, and having people over, and so there's all these sub archetypes in there. The planets are also archetypes. Each of them have their own characteristics and qualities. There are archetypes that express themselves through our mythology and our various like pantheons of gods through all cultures. So I'm most familiar with Greek mythology, because I really took to it in high school when I first learned about it. So examples would be like Hermes, the messenger god. So that is, and then those are all tied to the zodiac as well. But Hermes, the messenger god, is like the winged messenger that kind of is like the messenger, like it's carrying information from one person to another, right? So if you, for example, if you resonate as being a podcaster, and you're like, oh, I'm always like, I'm delivering information to people, or back in the day, if you were like a radio, you loved radio and television or journalism or something, you could carry the Hermes archetype. Or Zeus as the god of the gods, the head god in charge. Daphne, one of the she's sort of like a female forest nymph, like always free, never married, never beholden to the possession of any man. But we can move out of Greek mythology as well. And we can talk about like the trickster archetype expressing itself through Loki as an agent of chaos, or through Coyote in a lot of Native American mythologies. These are characters, and they're like bigger energies than each of us individually. There's obviously many archetypes in religion, the Mother Mary, or like, the Virgin Mary. There's I didn't really want to talk about different religions because that's a whole other touchy subject, like currently existing religions. So when I was thinking about religions and preparing for this masterclass, I thought about the world from Game of Thrones, and how they had a religion called the Seven. And that's an amazing example. So their archetypes for their religion are the father, the mother, the maiden, the crone, the warrior, the smith, and the stranger. And so they would pray to, like each of those archetypes kind of held, like if you were going to pray, you were going to offer a prayer. And this is how it works in our non-fictional religions as well. You would pray to the archetype that is kind of the keeper of the subject of your prayer. So if you were praying to get pregnant, you would pray to the mother. If you were praying to be protected, you would pray to the warrior, that kind of thing. And then I believe that the masters are also, they serve as archetypes. It's more like, I'm not denying that masters exist or existed, but they serve a very similar role to archetypes because of the way that we understand them. So an archetype would be the Christ, like the Lamb and the Savior, right? Those are archetypal concepts. The Jesus does not have to be the only way that we perceive and understand the archetypal concept of the Savior who comes to, die for our sins, essentially, or however we perceive saviors. Kuan Yin would be an embodiment of the like feminine softness, grace, and compassion. So she at once can be a master consciousness, but also an archetype that we tap into. And then there are many, 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 and I believe these are the ones that influence us. Like all the ones that I named previously are kind of like higher archetypes. I guess we can include here too the tarot as a source of archetypes. So for example, the High Priestess. I'm wearing my High Priestess necklace that was gifted to me today in honor of this. The Magician, the Hermit, the King of Swords, the Fool. There are so many archetypal energies expressed through the tarot. And all of these ones so far have been like higher archetypal energies. I'll do my best to explain that in a minute. But we also have very like lower archetypal energies, only in the sense that they're a little bit closer to what we experience in everyday life. So they're not lower as an inferior, they're just like I said, those sub archetypes. So we see them a lot in like as literary archetypes or entertainment, media archetypes. For example, most of our stories, our movies, our TV shows, our literature have a hero, and they have a villain, and they have the like the best friend or whatever, like the best supporting actress or whatever. But also we have superheroes. All the superheroes are sort of amalgamations of different archetypes, and they themselves then become an archetype that a lot of people identify with. So for example, the character, oh my god, so I'm not a superhero person, but I'm married to a superhero person, so I might get this wrong. And if so, please forgive me, but it's the one that comes to mind. There's a character called Quicksilver from the X-Men universe, which no, I'm not even going to say. I'm not even going to speculate if it's like DC or Marvel. I can't remember. I think it's Marvel. It doesn't matter. The character Quicksilver is just like very mercurial, very fast, very clever, and so that is, to me, that pulls from the kind of Loki Agent of Chaos archetype. It pulls from the Hermes Mercury archetype, and it's an amalgamation that creates a new archetype. So when somebody is watching an X-Men movie, they might really resonate with the character Quicksilver and feel like, oh yeah, that, they identify with it. Or an example, like one that was recently, oh, I got it right. Thanks, Amber. I try to pay attention. One that recently really resonated for me, it came into my awareness roughly this time last year. I think it was maybe like September or something like that, but was the movie The Eternals. But I didn't really resonate with the movie as such. I resonated with the archetype as it was expressed through the previews. So when I saw the previews, I was like, oh my God, I'm an Eternal. And that was enough to like help me lock into that bigger archetypal field of consciousness. And then we have our own everyday life archetypes. Some examples would be the judge, the healer or doctor, the elder, the loser, the nerd, the popular girl, the star athlete. We have all of these archetypes as well. And that's what I mean by lower archetypes. They're really important. They play a very important role in our experience of life, what we make of our lives, how we navigate it, how we express ourselves. But they can go a little bit undetected because they are a little bit more mundane. We don't notice them as much. They don't have that feeling of being larger than life, although make no mistake, they are larger than life. And then there are archetypes that have to do with like our spiritual selves, our soul mission. So those would be things like the shaman, the truth seeker, the oracle. It can also be things like Pleiadian, Syrian, angelics, mantids. All of these to me are archetypal energies. And so hopefully, as I've kind of tried to illustrate some of the examples, you can understand what I mean when I say that they're like fields of consciousness that take on particular characteristics. But again, there are so infinitely many different archetypes that it's impossible for me to name them all. But like one of the exercises that we can use to gain clarity is to look at, what archetypes we identify in the world outside of us. Now, sometimes the temptation is to try and look at the archetypes that we identify in ourselves in the world around us. But I feel like that's kind of a hard place to start because we have our own blind spots with ourselves. And I'm certainly not telling you not to try and identify your own archetypes. It's the whole purpose of this masterclass. But in order to get really clear on archetypes, I find that it's kind of easier to watch somebody else and see, or others, and watch the way that archetypal energies are expressing themselves through others. So let me search my mind. I actually didn't prepare an example of this, but let me just search my mind for a minute. Okay. So I'll take somebody that I know. I won't say who it is in my life because, I don't want to throw this person under the bus, but there's somebody that I know that I'm very close to who is in a constant state of kind of like disempowerment and victim and health struggle, and feels very much like runs a lot of martyr programs. Like martyr is an archetype. I carry the martyr archetype. I feel like it's part of my soul agreement to work on transmuting it. And it's like life's work. But I know somebody else who also carries very, very strong martyr archetype, but carries it in an unconscious way. So this person is not aware of carrying it. And it plays itself out as like this person is constantly sort of self-effacing, self-erasing, going along to get along, going with the flow, letting other people who are not carrying martyr programs, not carrying martyr archetype, who are more assertive in their own energy, like call the shots. And this person just goes along with it, but then kind of like moans about it and feels sorry for themselves about it. And it's easy for me, like this person can't see that for themselves, but it's easy for me because I'm not them. So I don't have the same blind spots in when I look at them that they do when they look at themselves. It's easy for me to see the martyr archetype playing out through them. So let me see what I want to say here. I guess it's important to say that, like, I'm pretty sure we are all plural archetypes at any given time. None of us is one single archetype. We all are very multifaceted, and we're connected in with different archetypal fields of consciousness in any given moment. And that our archetypes evolve as we evolve, or they change as we evolve. So I'll give you a personal anecdote to explain this too. When I was younger and I understood archetypes, but at a very rudimentary level, when I was like a lot younger, like an older teenager and in my early 20s, I was kind of cute. And I was kind of like, you know, I was a type, and I was certain guys, I was their type. I was that kind of like dark-haired, small, pixie-like artsy girl, like weirdo. And so, you know, I had a string of relationships, and I noticed that I often was a heartbreaker, but it wasn't because I was trying to like be a dick or anything like that. It just was what happened. Like and it wasn't about me, like, especially now looking back, I can totally see it was just like they would fall for a projection that they had of me, just as I did that with other guys that were my type. They would fall for the projection and then learn that their projection wasn't true and I couldn't live up to it. And then they would be heartbroken because they were young. And so at the time, I really identified with the archetype of like, I don't know, it's so weird and vulnerable to share this with all of you because I feel like it makes me sound so full of myself, but I really wasn't. But I identified with the archetype of Aphrodite. I felt like I was kind of like a love goddess that was I was like a catalyst for important internal transformation through romantic relationships. And I don't identify with that at all anymore, but it's not because I'm like better than that or something. It's just I'm in a different stage of life where, you know, I feel like I look like disheveled crap most of the time. I have 2 little kids. I'm just not even, you know, romance is like at the bottom of my priority list. And I have my husband. I'm very happy with him. I'm just not in that stage of life anymore. So I don't identify, yeah, well, totally, Julianne. Like that was exactly that. Like I think that they saw me that way, and so I saw myself that way, and yet it was part of a bigger story playing out, which was something that I understood in a very rudimentary way. So for everybody on the replay, Julianne said, like that was projected back to you at that time. So you identified. So yeah, I did. That's exactly how it worked. And it was a bigger story playing out. And the story for the people that I was with was that, you know, I was easy to project onto. And then I was easy to like I was able to let them down in a way that was probably required for like a bigger narrative to play out. And the bigger narrative is playing out through their own individual narratives, but it was also part of a bigger theme that we were all working through collectively. And also just to like be very clear that it's weird for me to use the term love goddess, but like I was definitely projecting onto guys that I had the hots for and totally getting my heart broken too, you know? So like I wasn't the shit or anything like that. But like I said, I don't identify with that anymore. I identify with totally different archetypes now. And it's just because my life changed and I had evolved. And so, you know, there is no, I don't even think that there is an overarching archetype that we absolutely, you know, represent through our lives. Like I don't, maybe for me it would probably be the mother. If there is one, it would be like I always have known I was meant to be a mother. I've always wanted to be a mother. I feel very strong mother energy. I feel it for people who aren't even my children. I feel it for grown adults. Like, you know, when I find out that somebody's inner child is hurting, like my mother heart just, you know, barfs love all over them. So maybe we do have overriding archetypal themes that run through our entire lives, but I would say that those are very, very, very rare and not anything that we have to get hung up on. I find it more effective personally to identify with the, you know, constellation of archetypes that resonate with us at any given moment and not to hold on tightly to them, but just like sync ourselves up with them. So so again, the archetypes are like, to me, they're like bigger characters. When I say larger than life, I mean like I almost envision the archetypes, especially the higher ones, as being like giants and at a level above us that we can't see. They are playing out their own dramas and we are kind of like, you know, that's how they used to see it in Greek mythology, was like the gods were on the top of Mount Olympus and they were playing out their dramas and they were using humans as like the puppets. So it's also kind of like you could see it as, you know, different gamers, you know, playing, I mean, that's a whole other, see, I was like, I'm going to do better talking about archetypes this time, but it's such a huge field. It's so, to me, it feels so abstract, but so important. It's very hard to talk about, but that's a whole other category of archetypes. It is like, you know, if you were going to play a game, again, because I'm not a gamer, I have limited games to draw on, but let's just say you were going to play World of Warcraft, because there are a lot of different characters you could choose. Like you could be like a weird warlock wizard skeleton character, you know, or you could be like a small little hobbity elf character. I mean, I don't know what they're all called, but you know what I mean? They're, and yet you are the bigger person that, or the bigger energy that is playing out like a narrative, especially if you're playing with other, like it's like a multiplayer game and you're playing with somebody and you both, let's say it's two dudes and they both have the hots for the same girl and they're like wanting her to pick, and so there's this weird tension between them because they're friends but they're also in a state of rivalry. And let's say the girl is playing with them too and they're both like projecting, you know, they have the hots for her and they're projecting that onto her and she's trying to be all neutral about it and it's kind of weird, and there's all this tension that's going to affect the characters they pick. It's going to affect the way that they play the game. Like there's a higher strata of energy. There are these higher fields of consciousness that are playing out bigger games than what we understand, but we are sort of like the characters that it's playing out through. And if we are if we're unconsciously playing out archetypes, then they kind of play us like puppets. Whereas if we consciously, meditate on or whatever, inquire and clarify what archetypal energies we align with and identify with at a given time, and we consciously sync up to that, then we become like, like little avatars that are extensions of a bigger story that's playing out. So I kind of feel like the human ego on its own is rather aimless. And it's not to disparage the ego, but kind of like, if we aren't tapping into those higher fields of consciousness, it's almost like we don't know what to do with ourselves. We're like livestock or ants. We're just doing our thing on a very narrow probability path. Again, I don't think anybody can actually live without embodying some kind of archetypal energy, but like the human ego, if it's only playing out its own story is usually really small. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if it appeals to you to play out a bigger story, then it's extremely effective to do it through melding with our archetypes. So I was just going to give an example and it briefly escaped. Oh yeah. Okay. So what I mean is I'm sure we all have people in our lives that we can look at who are really operating from an ego level of consciousness, who they aren't making any big moves in their lives. Like they're living like really small, very corralled lives. For example, if somebody who watches a lot of Price is Right and Wheel of Fortune and plays bingo and chain smokes cigarettes and drinks coffee, and they always sit in their same chair and they watch their same TV and they have their same friends and they eat the same thing and they don't really go anywhere else. It's not that they're not embodying archetypes, it's that they're not doing it consciously. And the human ego on its own it can be kind of aimless. It's just living out this little tiny story. But the archetypes there, for example, would be the archetype of the addict, the archetype of the, what word would it be? Like, I suppose it could be the archetype of the loser, but it's also like the archetype of like the person who never amounts to anything, like if we were watching our lives like a movie, we can sort of see it. We can see like, oh, this person is playing out that energy theme, that archetypal energy theme. They're just not, they're never amounting to anything. They always have an excuse. They just, never prioritize changing, whatever. That is nonetheless an archetypal theme, but because they're doing it unconsciously, they don't know. They're being played, and their little character is playing into a bigger narrative, and they're unaware of it, and they're like being puppeted around by the archetype of the addict, the archetype of the loser, the archetype of whatever, words apply, whatever archetypes apply. Or we could take, for example, the nerdy guy who just feels like he never gets the girl, and it just never works out for him, or he's with her and then she ends up leaving him for like some cool guy, the good guy. I mean, I've heard so many guys in my decades of adulthood see themselves that way, but on an unconscious level refer to themselves that way, where they're like, girls only want like the bad boys, and they say they want a good guy, but they don't actually want to be with me, and she left me or she cheated on me or whatever. So they're still playing out that bigger theme, that bigger narrative that is an energetic field in our collective consciousness, but they don't realize it. So it's kind of puppeting them, and it's dictating and determining the choices that they make in their lives. Amy says, so playing out unconscious archetypes is similar to playing out the unconscious shadow parts of ourselves, just on a larger collective level. Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. So if you pan up or pan out and you're looking at the whole big, comedy, tragedy, drama, like the movie of the human collective consciousness. This is one of the cool things about astrology is you can really see the archetype, the big archetypal themes that the collective is working through. For example, my Jupiter is in Libra and my Saturn is in Libra. And I don't really know what that means. I'm not going to try and explain it. But when I was back when I don't know, I was in my mid-20s and I was trying to learn about astrology and I was reading astrology books. One of the books that I saw said that it drew the analogy like because Jupiter and Saturn are generational planets, they're bigger planets. So they don't affect you individually as much. They are more like an entire generation moves through these energies because they're slower moving planets. Everything from Jupiter onwards. So the way that it was described is like, oh, like the astrologer who wrote this book kind of predicted like, oh, beauty, because Libra is a sign that governs like beauty. Libras really want to bring like beauty, harmony, and balance. And so they were just drawing the comparison to, or the connection to, the rise of plastic surgery and the rise of Photoshop and the rise of like, very false, weird veneer, very doctored levels of physical beauty, and how it kind of rose to predominance where we got to a point where all we were freaking seeing was like people with like horsey super white veneer teeth and like a very very particular look, very particular body proportions, like the same boobs all the time. We're just seeing the same fucking boobs all the time, always the same boob shapes, even though there's women everywhere and we all have different boobies. Somehow that's all we were seeing in magazines and commercials and billboards and movies and TV and award shows and all that stuff, right? So that's a bigger theme that was being played out in the collective consciousness, a bigger field of consciousness. And everybody who was tapping into the various sub archetypes associated with that bigger theme, they were playing it out on individual levels. And a lot of us were playing it out unconsciously. As we go through this ascension process where our consciousness rises and we become like deeply self-aware and we can see like this whole realm more for what it is, we start to be able to see those things and see, oh, what archetypal energy am I expressing? And like, what is this part of a greater, like what greater story or greater narrative is this part of? And then we can also choose our archetypes. We don't have to default on our like whatever archetype. Like say if you've had a bad run, like I have this uncle who, man, he just plays out the archetype of the loser, and he plays out these abandonment wounds, and he really struggles. He's had a really hard life, but he also 100% plays into it, like totally, and you cannot convince him otherwise. It is what it is. Totally fine. I love him regardless, but it's easy for me to see how he's played out this like theme of like the loser and the reject for 60 some odd years of his life, but that doesn't mean he has to play that out. He just is playing that out. It is an archetype that he identifies with, but he could decide that he is retiring that archetype, thanking it for everything that it has, shown him, brought him, whatever, and then decide to don a new archetype. And it doesn't have to be the exact opposite archetype. Sometimes that's too hard. So he wouldn't have to necessarily be like, well, I'm retiring the loser archetype and the reject archetype, and I am now like the successful, everybody loves me archetype. That probably depends on the person, depends on their mentality, depends on how much they understand that this is a holographic dream projection matrix, and that, you know, we can totally do that. But, you know, often we have these limiting perceptions where that polar opposite is hard to calibrate to. But he could switch his archetype to be the he could switch it to be like the mysterious lone wolf savvy investor, let's just say. So like mysterious, or like having mystique, whatever, being kind of like, you know, that's like, he doesn't actually have to change the patterns of his life. He's syncing up with a different archetypal field that is very similar, right? So it's not like going into denial, and it's also not you know, you could see it as like, what's the word that they use when they're reframing? And it is a reframing, but it's not a reframing that is delusional. It's a reframing that allows him to sync up to different archetype and start playing out different themes, but that are similar enough that he can believe it, you know. And then from there he can adjust to a different archetype. So if he switched his archetypes, if he was conscious enough to switch his archetypes and be like, oh, I'm going to play out, you know, the person with mystique, the lone wolf that has mystique, but like, I love being alone. I love being master of my own time, my own space. I love, you know, like not being beholden to anyone else's expectations or their schedule. Like, I don't want a relationship. I don't like having a lot of friends, blah, blah, blah. Then he starts playing out a different archetypal theme, you know. And then he could, rather than being a loser that everything like sucks at, he could become a savvy investor where, you know, he does have a good sort of ability to trend and forecast, like say cryptocurrency investments, right? So he can change that archetype, so he's not just the loser, but he's like, I'm a lone wolf with mystique and I'm a savvy investor. That just completely, without altering his life or his circumstances, he's syncing up to a different archetypal field, and that changes the way that his consciousness and creative life force energy flows through the channels of his life. Does this kind of make sense? If anybody could give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Katie, say it makes sense. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Julianne, you're saying it's like the ego doesn't have an archetype, but is thirsty AF to find one. Totally. So it tries to prove itself by convincing us that it is the only thing that we are at our core. Yeah, totally. Like, that's the ego in a nutshell. It just really, the ego is required for us to buy into this life. If we didn't have an ego, we would feel the day that we truly, truly transcend our ego, I think it, like, you know, on a collective level, is probably the day that we collectively ascend to a higher dimension of consciousness. The ego is required for us to be here to create the stories that we live out and to buy into this whole experience. And the ego needs to believe that it is like the realest thing, but the truth is the ego is sort of the puppet of these higher themes. The ego doesn't want to believe that. So what I'm advocating and suggesting in this masterclass is that if we consciously choose our archetypes, knowing that they continually change, then we are consciously syncing our field with a chosen, like, higher energy field that is playing itself out nonetheless. Yeah, so I'll give another example, and then maybe I'll open up and we can have a discussion or some questions if you want. So another personal example is, you know, like I actually don't super identify right now with the high priestess archetype, but it's an example of one. Identify more with the oracle, which is why, like on Instagram, for example, I don't put like priestess or high priestess anymore. I briefly did, but it's not because, I don't think I'm good enough or whatever. It's just I actually feel more like, whew, like oracle to me is sort of seeing down the corridors of time, past, present, and future, and being able to sort of articulate the energy in very annoyingly abstract and cryptic ways, I'm sure. But the the high priestess to me is a higher field, or to bring it around to sorceress, that's actually probably a better one to lean on, which to me also feels like an extension of the priestess. The reason that if anybody resonates with the sorceress archetype, I resonate with the sorceress archetype right now. And the distinction to me feels like the priestess is the keeper of the mysteries, and the sorceress is like the active agent on earth. And you can be both. I believe that I am both. And the sorceress is really predominant in my energy field because it feels to me like the sorceress archetype is a larger archetype, and she's like, fuck this patriarchy bullshit, it's my turn now. Like, oh hell no, I've had enough of this. And we are taking back command of the ship, and we're taking over this realm. You guys have acted like fools for long enough. That's what it feels like to me. It literally feels like a higher consciousness who in the bigger sort of play, or like theatrical play is what I mean, of the human collective narrative that plays out here. It is now like we're changing to a new act. It's not just a new scene, it's a whole new act. And in this act of the play, the wounded masculine patriarchal systems are finally, like, they're just crying on the ground like a tantruming toddler. And the sorceress is coming in like the badass mother that's like, no, and we're too old for this, we're not entertaining this nonsense anymore. And like, so she is coming forward as a front and center player in this bigger theatrical that is playing itself out, and she is sort of stepping in, and it's her turn now. But previously, in the previous acts, it wasn't her turn. And we have a tendency to interpret it like, oh, everything before was terrible, and oh, we have to rescue humanity from the archons. And I mean, that's just a layer of narrative. But on the bigger scale, this is all just like a dream theatrical drama narrative that's playing out. So the act is changing, and the sorceress, the woman who, like, oh my God, I feel my womb like I've never felt it before right now. And I feel like my earth, I feel my root chakra, I feel my earth star chakra. Like, I feel this deep connection. I feel like, I don't know, like I'm channeling my inner, those really incredible, like, thick, like, I'm pausing because I'm like, oh, is this gonna make me sound so racist? I hope not. It's not. I don't intend it to be disrespectful at all. But like, I'm channeling my inner, or I'm feeling like I'm tapping into this, like, powerful Black woman. And she's big, and she is not fucking moving for anyone. And she is like, I am not taking shit anymore. That's what it feels like, but it's not me. I'm tapping into this higher field of consciousness. And that's how those are the associations I make with it. So I identify with the sorceress who has like pull up so much energy from the earth and can, like, blast it out her heart center and like literally perform magic. And what it feels like is the sorceress field is pulling a bunch of us in so that we can play out her part in the play. We can play out her theme. And so it feels very aligned and empowering and proactive for me to sync up to that field and like consciously choose, like, oh, this is the archetypal energy I am going to play out right now. I'm going to lend my little body and my little human life as like a vehicle or a character, a puppet. However, puppet sounds too passive or something like that, too abdicating of my power. And that's not really how I mean it. Like I'm lending the human that I am to this archetypal field of consciousness to play out its role, with the awareness that there's a whole bigger drama, bigger narrative that's playing out. So that's what I mean by larger than life. That's the one that resonates with me right now. And if I wasn't aware of my archetypes, if I wasn't aware of that archetype, I would probably be feeling more like, a rudderless boat on the sea in a storm, being crashed about in all the waves of every, in piece of funhouse circus insanity that's playing out around us in the external matrix. I would probably feel really small and yet, I would still be playing out an archetype. It would be the archetype of like the damsel or the victim or whatever, where our archetypes are being upgraded. We're moving into a whole different act, and our awareness of the field that we're sinking into is a total advantage. It's just, it feels like an advantage. It feels like you could be so effective when you know what field you're tapping into. And I also feel, which is new for me, last year with the priestess, I had to work really hard to feel worthy of that archetype. That was constant, continual, daily work to feel worthy of it. And this year, I feel like it's not hard for me to feel worthy of it at all, because it's not personal. It's not personal to me. It's like I was able to remove my own remove myself from the equation while still being an important part of the equation, if that makes sense. So I think I just understand it better. I understand these archetypal fields better, where I'm just like, oh, okay, this is what I'm sinking into. This is what I'm embodying. This is what I'm lending myself to play out. And so it feels very effective, and it's not about me, and it's not about superiority at all. It's just the awareness that there are these bigger fields of consciousness that are playing out their own narratives, and that it just feels better. I don't know how to put it. It feels better. It feels like a better use of my incarnation to consciously sync up to the field that resonates the most with me, and just being aware that different archetypal energies are playing themselves out through me, or using me to play themselves out, would be a better way to put it. Okay, so that was what I had to talk about today. Tomorrow, with part 2, I'm trying this thing. I don't know, this might be the last time I try it. We'll see, but I like to give processes, because you probably have figured this out by now, but I love showing up and just talking to all of you and sharing all the things that come through me. That's super fun, very fulfilling for me. But I also very much feel like, well, what's the point of me talking about this stuff if I then just like kind of peace out and leave you to figure out how to apply it, or like leaving it only partially digested? So tomorrow is going to be like all about how to identify your archetypes, and a process to identify your archetypes. And, I also believe, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow too, but I also believe that we are healing those wounded archetypes. So for example, when I was talking about my uncle, if he shifted from the loser to the lone wolf with mystique, he's not just abandoning the loser archetype. He would be consciously like healing the loser reject archetype. Or, we're all working through the prostitute archetype. And I know that probably is like, what? But what is the prostitute? She is, and it's not always a she, obviously, but I'm just going to, we have gendered language, so I'm going to go with she, but she is the one who allows her sacredness to be commodified in a way that is disempowering for her, right? So she is the one who gives away something that is sacred in exchange for survival needs. In exchange for like her survival, like, having a particular survival need being met, whether it's addiction or whether it's like just literally like, paying for rent or paying for food or whatever. And we're all playing out the prostitute archetype because on some level, I believe that almost all of us, myself included, even though I've created this business that I love, we are still interacting with money from a place of survival uncertainty, and where we give away things that we would rather not give, or we not give away, but like in exchange for money, basically, we do things that we would rather not do, is ultimately what it comes down to, so that we can have money to ensure our survival. So we're working through the prostitute archetype right now. And I believe that we're being called to heal the prostitute archetype. We're being called to bring more consciousness to it all the time, and knowing that healing is never an overnight situation. So I've done a ton myself to heal that prostitute archetype, even without knowing it. I thought I was just healing my money wounds, but like now I understand, like, oh, it's a much bigger thing. It is money wounds, and it's like that prostitution archetype energy. And it's a process, because that one is deeply ingrained in us from a trauma place. But we're doing this beautiful work where we are witnessing the prostitute archetype playing herself out, and we can elevate her to like the divine courtesan, or you could call her the divine concubine, although that word still kind of feels a little bit like not exactly like fully healed field to me. But where we leave behind, like maybe courtesan is a good one, or something like that, where we leave behind the compromising of ourselves and our sovereignty, and we leave behind the dishonoring of ourselves and our sacredness, and we allow ourselves to receive money, or value, I guess, in exchange for the gifts that we have to offer. But we do it from a place where it's on our terms, and it is like in total alignment and integrity with, with our sacredness and honoring ourselves. It's like not letting any part of a broken, dysfunctional, wounded system to have control over us anymore. So we're elevating the prostitute archetype to a higher expression of like, I don't know, it feels like, I don't know, like the Empress. Like it feels very feminine, like, oh, I have this, I am a beautiful gift, and I'm giving, and I allow myself to receive and return, and I give in accordance to my sacred boundaries of honoring when I want to give, what I want to give, how I want to give. And I'm never giving in a way that is dishonoring of myself, because I'm under the thumb of like a survival trauma based system or whatever. Yeah, super needed, super needed. So we're doing really sacred work. Tomorrow is, yeah, about more about that, about healing our archetypes, because we also all have lower, like the, not just the lower archetypes, but we embody the wounded archetypes. We all embody a wounded archetype. It's fine. It's, again, it's not personal. We're just vehicles through which these bigger themes are healing themselves. And it's really fun to do it on a conscious level. So it's like figuring that out, more about that healing process, how to find and identify our archetypes, all that kind of stuff. So tomorrow's more process based. There's definitely going to be information, but there's process to it too. If you are in the $33 a month Patreon, then you automatically get part 1 and part 2. If you don't want to join the Patreon, but you would like to sign up for the part 2, a la carte, it is $44, which, I mean, I just feel like it's super affordable. I'm doing my best to find ways to give out this information and, again, heal the prostitute archetype. And then the other thing too is, if you resonate with that sorceress archetype I was describing, holy moly, like, this is where I'm not good at marketing either, because I'm not good at like concise sales pitches. And I also don't even want to give you a sales pitch, but I do want to invite you in if it resonates with you. If you resonate with that sorceress archetype I was describing, of like being in that feminine energy. And PS, I definitely, for all my men that signed up, I definitely feel like a sorcerer archetype as well. So I don't want to be exclusive, like, you know, gender exclusivity or whatever, but the one that I'm tapping into is feminine, but it definitely can be molded to fit a masculine energy too. But that powerful feminine, like bad bitch, like oracular channel, like I just see us as this council. I'm like, so it's so clear. The transmission is so clear. It's like, it's kind of like we are all coming together. We are this council. We are a council of sorceresses from the sorceress archetypal field. And we are coming together and we're just like, this shit is not happening anymore. And like, fuck this. And just totally owning, like, even as I say it, I feel on a level that I never have. And I carry the mother archetype, but like, I'm feeling my sacral chakra, like, vroom, vroom, vroom. It's so activated. And it feels like this powerful, like, we're channeling power from above, we're channeling power from below, we are, you know, wielding it through our hands. We're able to like bring in balls of energy and move it. And the thing though, to me, the distinction, the reason that I spelt it sorceress, not sorceress, like kind of the traditional spelling, is because what I ultimately feel that distinguishes this from something like witchcraft or whatever, it's like distinguishes it from the elites or the archons themselves, who already, you know, who have been controlling this realm for a long time, is that we have the integrity to wield this level of power and do it on behalf of the collective consciousness. It's like I'm tapping into, you know, I was saying that like big, beautiful Black women, but now I'm also feeling like these Maori women, and I'm feeling these Native American, Native Canadian women, like indigenous women all over the world, including like European indigenous societies, because like, you know, white culture is indigenous too, is what I'm trying to say. So, but I'm just feeling like these mothers, whether they actually passed humans through their wombs or not, I'm just feeling the womb so strong. And it's like, like this is not happening anymore. And I'm feeling us coming together in this extremely powerful way. So if that resonates with you and it appeals to you at all, Starting on August 27th, I'm bringing together, it feels like a pretty large group of women who are ready to receive this transmission, and we're receiving this transmission. It's about like processes and grid work and actually wielding that level of power and opening up those channels and doing all of these things. And it's, yeah, it this is why I can't ever do concise sales pitches. It's you know that you are here to be this like part of this super, super powerful divine feminine energy rising and taking this realm over again on behalf of the children, on behalf of the elders, on behalf of the animals, on behalf of the plants, and on behalf of the men, then please join me. More information is to come, like links and stuff and details to the program. Okay, yes, Julianne, powerful ass broads. Okay, so let's open it up. If anybody has any questions about archetypes, if there's anything that needs clarifying, go for it. We have another 16 minutes, probably like 15 and a half minutes. But if you don't have any questions, in order to not sit here with crickets for too long, you can just give me like a heart emoji, or like you can type a heart in the chat box, or you can like put your little heart emoji on your screen face, and then I'll know that you don't have any questions that want to be answered, or comments, anything that you want to say. And if you want to ask a question too, you can totally take yourself off mute. Victoria, no questions. Cool. Yeah, you don't have to type it. Alex is good. Okay. Three people all good. Okay, great. You're all good. Awesome. I'm so excited to have shared this information with you. I hope that you resonate and bask around in it, and really cool things come up for you. And if you are signed up in either of the avenues to receive part 2, then I'm so excited to craft it for you and deliver it tomorrow. Okay, I love you so much, everyone. Bye.